Hi, it's Ben, back for another episode. Today we're talking about easing the unbearable sense of aloneness. One of my business mentors, so much has changed over the past few years since we first went into lockdown with COVID. Before, I used to teach classes on a weekly basis in New York City and every other week in Boston. Kept me really busy. But the world changes now. It means I got to go online more. But anyway, as I said, tonight we're going to be addressing the issue of loneliness or aloneness. Same thing. But as I was starting to say, one of my business mentors challenged me to go online every day, which I'm at a loss for words on that. Can I think of enough to say in that time? Actually, for many years, I've been, I went through this very intensive process, where, going way back, suffered a lot of physical, emotional abuse, a lot of trauma growing up, and that affected my relationships. And I was reenacting a lot of that early life trauma, and I had to dig myself out of a very deep hole. And it was a very intuitive process for me. I was initially flailing blindly, and yet I was just determined to do whatever it took to facilitate the healing of those wounds, and also because I wanted to have someone in my life. And so I was like, oh, what do I do? How do I make this happen? And I didn't know much of anything in the beginning. As I said, I flailed blindly, but I kept exploring, and anytime I found different practices or interventions that held promise, I would test it out. And I wouldn't just do it once, or twice. I would, really dive into things and work with different practices and interventions thoroughly. And that's how I determined those practices and interventions that were most effective. And it facilitated my own healing. And then as I became stronger and more resilient, and as I got to better space and continued, to progress along the way, then it enabled me to work with other people and facilitate that same kind of healing process with them. So just so happens it's Saturday evening, and I'm next door to a bar. And so there's quite a raging party over there. Thankfully, the music's not blasting. I called and reported them to the police numerous times. I'm sure other people did too. So those fines add up, especially in New York City with repeat violations. The fines get more substantial. And so they're not blasting the music anymore, but it's a bunch of drunken bimbats, just laughing and cackling over there. Well, okay, they're having fun, but anyway, so it's kind of appropriate in a way, considering the subject that I'm going to be addressing tonight. Well, going way back, early in my life, especially during many aspects of childhood and adolescence just seem weird. You grow up, you're born into a family, and you grow up and they're into whatever it is, their religion and their weird, cultural, whatever they're into, and being drug along. You don't have much choice as a child. You're just like, you find yourself in the midst of whatever family you're born into. And then childhood, in Fort Worth, Texas, but then when my mom remarried and ended up in Southeast Texas, and that was extraordinarily difficult. It's like, maybe if I'd been in a different community, it would have been better, but the community that I was living in, I didn't feel like I really resonated. And so I spent, if I wasn't in school, much of my time was spent alone. And all those years, growing up at 17 when I took off. And then I was living in Oklahoma in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians. Yeah, it resonated very much with those people. And so immersed in the traditional culture. I was dancing in the powwows. I had those huge feather bustles on my back and the eagle feathers and all that stuff. And I'd sit up in peyote meetings all night with the native elders. And then after that, moving on to the Navajo reservation. And yeah, so during that stage of my life, there was more of that sense of connectedness. And skipping over a number of years, I think it's early 30s when I first came to New York City and Boston. It was much more challenging to maintain a practice in New Mexico. I don't know why. People were just tended to be kind of spacey. They would do a session or two and disappear. And when I spoke with other practitioners, they were relating the same kind of experience to me. So I come to the East Coast, and I had quite a bit of work. Especially I'd go into Boston and I would have like 2-3 weeks of appointments scheduled in advance of my visit, and more appointments would come in. So my schedule would be packed. And by the time I left town, I would be dead exhausted, for just working, weeks on end with very little break, doing so many sessions. That changed over time because as people got on smartphones and social media and all that, it rewires people's brains. And so people's attention span just shrunk. And it became much more challenging. Then even Boston and New York became much more like New Mexico, where people would show up a time or two and disappear. So I had to constantly hustle, just doing classes, as I said, on a weekly basis. One of the things I did like, though, about being in New Mexico and even the Midwest, like Kansas City and Oklahoma, is that people tend to be much more friendly. New Yorkers can be friendly to a point. A lot of times you can be out and, just out in the city or on the subway, and you get into a conversation. And you get into these animated conversations with people, but there's this very strange rule that a lot of people adhere to, that if you meet somebody in a public space, it goes no further. You talk then, you say bye, and very likely you never see or hear from them again. Maybe you run into them, but often never. And even when you do connect with people, those connections can be very fleeting. When I first came to the city, and part of what brought me to New York is that there was this thriving music scene at the time. And I was going to concerts like every week, and often multiple times a week. And I got to meet many of my favorite recording artists. It's not hard to do if you're into jazz and experimental music. They don't have that massive following, like pop stars do. And so I'd go see all these people, and I'd go up and talk with them after the performance. And so I knew a lot of them on a first name basis. I'd see some of them repeatedly. And that went on for some time. The music scene started dying out after a while. But the other motivation to come to New York too is there's part of me that's always just fascinated by people of all these different cultures. I thrive on diversity. Just the more the better. I get bored shitless if I have to be around the same kind of people all the time, like people with different races and colors and cultures. And I feel like I've developed so many different sides or aspects of myself. And so I can bring out certain aspects of me and relate to this one group over here, and other aspects of me I can relate to these other people. And maybe I'm like a chameleon or something, but that's just how I'm comfortable. And so I had this intuitive sense that I would be going overseas. And yes, that's happened. I spent a lot of time overseas over the years. But there are also times when I was a bit stranded here. But let's see. Early on, when I first came to New York, I connected with this woman from Syria. And it was working out for a while. I seemed to have a nice connection, but when I wouldn't convert to Islam, she broke it off. And so after that initial grieving period, went on for some time, 6 months. But I just decided I really do want to be in a serious, long-term, committed relationship. And so I decided I would approach at least 2 women a day until that happened. And that actually went on for a couple of years. And it was a great opportunity. It helped me to work through a lot of my shyness, my social awkwardness, and develop my communication skills. And as I said, that went on for a few years. But I didn't have a whole lot to show for it in New York City. Sometimes there were many instances where I could feel that there was rapport. It was obvious that the woman I was engaging with, like, she was enjoying the conversation. There was like a mutual enjoyment or liking of one another. But as was often the case, maybe we would exchange contact information, but after a few messages, texts or emails early on or whatever, and most instances I never saw or heard from them again, and that's so typical in New York City. And although when I in other parts of the country and when I spent time in other countries, it seemed like it would just happen naturally without that much effort. But in New York, it didn't. And I remember one point where I think there were maybe like 5 different women on the periphery, and just wanting to have some kind of connection, even if it was platonic friendship, just wanting to feel connected to someone. And in many ways, I find it easier to relate to women than men. But it just wasn't happening. I was putting out all this effort. And so one night I was just sitting at home in the apartment, and I could feel that I was putting out all this effort, and it just wasn't happening. And so I just sat down and closed my eyes, and I just dropped down into my body and all its feelings and sensations. I just started to breathe. And it felt horrible. And as I kept descending deeper into what I was feeling in my body, there was this sense of being way overextended. I don't know if it would, how well I can demonstrate this on camera, but let me try. But it felt like I was like this, just trying to reach out, trying to hold on, trying to have this connection, but it wasn't happening. It wasn't going anywhere. So as I continued to breathe into that, I could feel myself letting go of that effort, that attempt to try to make a connection happen. And as though part of me was just saying, fuck it. And as I continued to breathe into those feelings and sensations, I could feel myself letting go. And fortunately, I had this intuitive sense, and that led me to, I just had all these frequent flyer miles racked up on United Airlines for all the flying across the country I was doing. And I had this intuitive sense to get on a plane and go to Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, it was just night and day difference, whole different reality. I was didn't have to make that much effort. I'd walk out the door, people are connecting with me. I almost had to make an effort not to connect. And people were just friendly and engaging. It was dangerous too. I mean, there were also predatory people out there, scam artists, and during the wartime, there were lots of criminals running around that should have been locked up in prison, but so much of the country's resources were going to the war effort, and well, even the police and organized crime, and things were quite a mess there. But I did connect, and as I said, without that much effort. At one point, I remember in my kind of late 30s, and I was studying hypnosis for a few years. I went to Ohio to do this internship. Even there, I think I was there about a week's time without even really making, well, I didn't make any effort. It just happened. It was like, boom, I was in a relationship, And so in a lot of these other places where I spent time, it came naturally, easily. But being in New York, there were times like 2009 when those banksters, those people in the financial industry with their risky financial maneuvers, and they crashed the economy. And it's like the bottom fell out from under me, and a lot of people during that time. And it was extraordinarily difficult. The phone stopped ringing. I didn't have much of any work. It was also, that was around the time that people started getting smartphones and becoming more distracted. So, multiple things, not working in my best interest. But for a few years, it took a few years to get back on track. But things worked very differently as people's attention span became much shorter. Whereas before I can do like class or radio interview here or there, and I'd end up with a lot of work, and it would just kind of sustain itself. It would just keep going. But then after a while, it was like I had to do classes on a weekly basis because people's attention span went to shit. And so it was an enormous amount of effort, but I couldn't go anywhere. As I said, I was stranded. And being in the city, being in New York City, it was so hard to connect. And so there are a lot of times, if I wasn't working, if I wasn't teaching classes, if I wasn't doing sessions for people, it's like I didn't really have anyone much to hang out with. And I was on my own so much of the time. And that was difficult. There were a lot of periods of time where I was just alone. And that aloneness, as many of you know, it can be extraordinarily painful. But in order to cope with it, I would just, let me back up a bit. Many of us distract ourselves. If we're feeling alone, we self-medicate with alcohol, other recreational drugs, even pharmaceuticals. We do all kinds of things to distract ourselves. We spend a lot of time online and on social media, and maybe we hang out with people or in places, going to bars, going to other kinds of events, spending time with people that are not necessarily the healthiest of connections. A lot of times, if we're lonely, we stay in relationships that are not very healthy. And we end up engaging in ways with people where we end up compromising ourselves and we do more harm than good. But during some of these periods of time, like around the financial crash in 2009, I couldn't go anywhere. And I felt like, as I said, stranded in New York City. And so I was experiencing this profound loneliness, from not connecting. But when I would sit and I would do my meditation practice, I would just bring my awareness into the feelings themselves, the feelings of loneliness. I would center my awareness. Mostly I felt that in my chest cavity, and I would just breathe from the depths of that aloneness. And that's a very powerful thing to do. It can be very uncomfortable at first as you dive into that aloneness. You breathe from the depths of it. But what I found is that by breathing from the depth of the aloneness, it alleviated the pain of the loneliness itself. And again, that was a difficult time in many ways. There wasn't a lot, at least I didn't feel that there wasn't a lot to sustain me. It was like, I don't know, maybe the best analogy is like, having to make your way across the tundra in a snowstorm or blizzard or something, or just going upstream. But there wasn't practices. I would just drop into that aloneness and I would keep breathing with that. But as I did so, I could feel as I continued to breathe, I would go through those layers of aloneness, because we have our emotions, the way they situate themselves, it's like these layers of emotions. As you keep breathing through it, you'll move through those layers. And underneath, I could feel this deeper sense of connectedness. It was more like a sense of connectedness to an inner core being. And we all have this. Underneath it all, behind the facade, there's this deep inner core, and we tend to lose touch with that, with all the distractions, and as we suppress, a lot of the stress and pain and adversity, and we suppress a lot of these emotions and the stagnation that accumulates within our body that builds up over time, and so we lose touch with that inner core. But often, my daily experience was reflecting back to me this not connecting. And so normal human response to that, feeling very lonely, I would bring my awareness to it and I would just keep breathing into that loneliness. It's like, well, that was my reality. That was my experience of reality at that time. And that was what I was feeling in response to it. So I would drop into the depth of it and I would just keep following those feelings. And for me, it was a matter of survival. I mean, it was experiencing that aloneness can be quite painful. But by breathing into the aloneness, it made it much more bearable. It just eased the discomfort. And what I could feel happening is that even though I wasn't getting this outward support and nourishment, encouragement, it wasn't coming from outside, but it's like I had this difficult path that I was on at the time, and I just stayed with those. As I said, as I breathed into that aloneness, and I could feel this presence emanating from within. And so instead of getting the support from outside, I felt this current or this presence, again, emanating from within. And that gave me the strength to push forward, to carry on. After some time, things did open up again. I was able to go back to Sri Lanka, connect again. Yeah, had a different girlfriend. Had some other friends and other people that I was very connected with. I stayed in the former war zone in the north of Sri Lanka, a good part of that time. A number of my friends are former members of the LTTE, Tamil Tigers. They're during the Civil War. They were basically fighting for their survival. So they're actually, as I got to know them, I found them a lot of these people to be very nice, very kind, very caring. But being in Sri Lanka, there's that warmth and that connectedness. And then COVID happened. I was coming back from Sri Lanka as New York City was going into lockdown, and so even now it's this time where so many things are in transition for me. So hopefully I'll be able to return before too long to Sri Lanka and maybe even spend time in some other parts of the world. But so many of us, at different points in our lives, maybe I know people who are expatriates, for instance, and they're in some part of the world where they don't really feel that connected to the local population. There many instances, people going through a breakup or divorce, and you don't have that person in your life anymore, and you're just on your own, and there's the huge void. And we do so many things, to distract ourselves. We throw ourselves into work, and we drink, and we smoke weed, and do other recreational drugs, or take pharmaceuticals, and all these things, just kind of numb or disconnect us from the pain of our aloneness. So we spend a lot of time online, social media. We're trying to fill that place inside of us that hurts from being alone. But as much as you can, I would encourage you to just be present with that instead of fighting it or resisting it or distracting yourself or filling that space with people with whom you don't really relate, and being places where doing things that you're not all that interested in. I do encourage you to get out and engage with people as much as you can. I did quite a bit in New York, with the concerts that I used to go to. There's part of me that's, again, this is a very transitory stage for me. And, a big part of what kept me in New York was I was training with this master from China for years. But I feel in many ways I paid a price for staying here in the city. And it depends. People have very, very different experiences in New York City. It's like a different reality. And I think a lot of it depends on how you resonate or if you don't resonate. People in the arts and theater communities and whatever, there's this large network of people they're connected to, and they can be right at home here. Maybe they're just on the right wavelength. Or I know some people who've partnered and fell in love with their life here, but that hasn't been my experience. I've never really had that kind of connection in the city. I always had to go other places. But I was still listening to a book right now that it's called, the book is by Vivek Murthy, if I'm pronouncing his name right. I'm not sure. Together, the healing power of human connection in a sometimes lonely world. And at first I was just kind of lightly listening, but as I continue to listen to this book, it really has drawn me in. And it's like I've been taking like a lot of detailed notes while listening to this book. It is just a lot of amazing insight in terms of like the importance of human connection. And we're basically stating that human connection is vital as food and water, is crucial. Strong social relationships significantly decrease the risk of premature death. And there are many instances where, you have a couple married, and especially, for instance, where the wife would die first, and the husband is just overwhelmed with grief, and, before too long, he checks out. And that prolonged loneliness can lead to stress, inflammation, sleep or disrupted sleep, heightened risk of depression and anxiety. It's a state that the body perceives as an emergency, leading to increased cortisol levels and other stress-related responses. Now, what I found, though, is, working with the meditation I described, it helped to mitigate the stressful impact, and it helped me to get through these really difficult times and made the experience a lot more bearable. And as I said, working with this practice, I could feel this presence emanating from within. It was like this inner nourishment, their strength that carried me forward. It got me through these difficult times, because many of us at some point in our lives, we will experience times of aloneness, times where, even if, for instance, you're moving to a new city, you don't know many people, and it takes time to form those connections. So just to reiterate here, as I said, if you find yourself at a point in your life, and a lot of us, as we get older, as we're in our teens and our 20s, especially in college, and we're surrounded by all these people who are much more available, and we have these social networks. But if you find yourself at some point in your life, and maybe you've gone through the end of a relationship has ended, you're on your own, you're in a different city, or you're getting older, and people are busy with their own lives, and you're just on your own so much of the time. Notice how you feel in response to that. If you're struggling with the feelings of being alone, instead of fighting it or resisting it, see or feel, actually, how present you can be with those feelings of aloneness. Where are they situated in your body? Bring your full awareness to those feelings wherever you experience them. Descend as deeply as you can into the depth of these feelings, breathing very soft and deep. Follow the feelings as they go through their progression. It's feelings like loneliness. It's not like a one and done, just breathe into it once. Okay, I've done that. That's resolved. It's over. It's, for many of us, we may be, going through certain periods of our lives, whether it could be, in some instances, it may last for months or years. Although, as I said, do the best you can to get out and engage. Even to this day, I still find it difficult to find the connections in New York City. It comes much easier when I travel and I'm in other parts of the country. And, over time, I'll be spending less and less time in the city. I stayed in the city so I could continue. I spent 17 years training with Shifu Li Tai Liang in the internal martial arts. But as time goes on, I will be traveling a lot more in this country, and hopefully I'll be returning to Sri Lanka, maybe other countries, hopefully as well. But anyway, lots to think about here. I will leave you with